الجمعية الاقتصادية وباسم لجنة السياسات في الجمعية الاقتصادية نرحب فيكم أجمل ترحيب ونشكركم على تشريفنا بالحضور. اليوم احنا يسعدنا نرحب بالدكتور جياكومو لوتشياني. الأستاذ لوتشياني شخصية مرموقة أكاديميا في مجال الاقتصاد السياسي، يدرس حاليا من بعد تاريخ طويل بالتدريس والأبحاث والمؤلفات، يدرس حاليا في Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies في جنيف، وأيضا يدرس في سيونس بو في فرنسا، والاثنين من الجامعات العريقات متخصصين في العلوم الإنسانية مع اهتمام خاص في علم الاقتصاد. مثل ما ذكرت الأستاذ لوتشياني كتب عديد من المؤلفات في الاقتصاد السياسي، بين مقالات متخصصة في الدوريات العلمية، وأيضا له عدد كبير من الكتب، يمكن آخرها عمل بالمشاركة مع كاتب آخر كتاب بعنوان Business Politics in the Arab World، وأيضا كتاب بعنوان Resource Blessed Countries Diversification and the Gulf Development Model. اليوم دكتور جياكومو لوتشياني راح يشاركنا آراءه ونظرته حول إصلاح القطاع الحكومي، واللي مثل ما حضراتكم عارفين له أهمية خاصة في الجمعية الاقتصادية، وراح يركز بالتحديد على رفع الكفاءة في القطاع العام في دولة حظاها الله بالموارد الطبيعية مثل دولة الكويت، والتحديات اللي تواجهها مثل هذه الاقتصاديات مثل ما تشكل أيضا فرص في نفس الوقت. وراح يركز على ما يسمى بجزر الكفاءة أو الآيلاندز أوف إكسلنس. راح يعرفنا بشكل مفصل أكثر على ما يسمى بجزر الكفاءة. ختاما لمقدمتي أرحب مرة ثانية بالدكتور جياكومو لوتشياني وأطلب منه يتفضل يبتدي العرض.
Thank you. This one? Yes. Thank you especially to it's my first visit to Kuwait. It is not, I've been coming on and off since 1981. I think 1981 was my first visit to Kuwait. So I've seen quite a few changes. Although of all the Gulf countries, Kuwait is not the one that I visit most frequently. Nevertheless, I think I'm very much interested in following the development and the trajectory of this country in its economic development. My topic today is how to keep your rentier government lean. I will explain in a moment why I speak of rentier government and why I think there is a problem in keeping it lean. I should say first and foremost to begin with that I'm not so much an expert in public administration. That's not where I come from. I come from economics and development studies. In what I'm going to tell you is rather the outcome of thinking and reflecting on the challenges that the Gulf countries, especially as major oil producers, find on the path towards sustainable development, in the role of government in this process, and how the government can play and should play a fundamental role, but at the same time, at some point, retreat in order to allow society and the economy to fully develop and prosper. Let me start from this, which is a very simple representation. Thank you. Let me start from this slide, which is a very simple representation of the situation of the rentier state. What is peculiar about the rentier state is that it receives oil income, or the oil rent, directly from the rest of the world, and this comes directly into the hands, into the coffers of the state, without really touching much of the society or the national economy. The oil sector normally is a relatively small enclave. It does not employ many people. It does not have a large footprint on the local economy. So it is then when the government, when the rentier state spends money, utilizes some of the oil income for domestic expenditure, that society and the national economy are feeling the benefit of this source of income. And then, of course, this is manifested through imports from the rest of the world, and the circuit is closed. The state can also engage sometimes in direct imports. You see that especially in connection with military expenditure. And it can also engage in savings and financial placements. That's the whole story of sovereign wealth fund that I will not discuss very much today. So that's the point. Rentier states tend to be fat, and that is to be expected because the state needs to spend domestically. You know, sometimes I hear people saying to especially new emerging oil producing countries, you should not spend this money, you should set it aside. But if you don't spend the money, the vast majority of society does not benefit at all. So the point is that there is a necessity for the state to spend the money, and obviously this tends to create a large government sector. Setting money aside, as many people suggest in sovereign wealth fund or other forms, may be wise. It certainly is wise in certain cases. It depends on the size of population, the size of resources, the level of development at the start. So if you are Norway, it makes certain sense, but if you are Mozambique, it doesn't make sense in the same fashion because you have different needs, requirements to begin with. If all the money is set aside, neither the people nor the economy benefit from the oil revenue. So I sometimes find myself quite critical of the Norwegian example because I think their sovereign wealth fund has exceeded a reasonable size, but we shall see. Now, spending inevitably tends to support big government, and that's where the challenge comes. It is, however, possible to resist the temptation and stay fit, so to speak, although it requires some effort. How can this be achieved? Well, there are many ways in which you can spend money. Of course, traditionally, the first and foremost way in which the oil rent has been used is by offering employment in the state sector. And that's what every oil-producing country does, and to some extent it's necessary because you need to establish a capable government sector, a capable bureaucracy, but sometimes this becomes excessive. Then you have the provision of free or subsidized services to the population. Again, this is ubiquitous, everybody does that. You have various forms of consumption subsidies or maintaining prices much lower than regional or international norms, which again is common in many oil-producing countries, including this one. Then you have the possibility of providing loans or grants to economic activities or families. We have several institutions that are geared to do that. And finally, we have state procurement, the purchase of goods and services from the private sector. Now, not all of these things have the same consequences. So, while the first three definitely end up in creating big government, the last two may lead to a strengthening of the private sector. So, already within the composition of current expenditure, you can choose different forms of circulating the rent or putting the rent in circulation in the national economy, and depending which form you choose, you will have different consequences. The issue is that the immediate temptation for any government is to engage in direct delivery. In other words, the government will see that there is need for certain services, need for more education, need for more health services, need for transportation services, need for infrastructure. And what you do is you take care of it directly. You create branches of the bureaucracy that deliver these services directly or engage in economic activities. This has been the immediate reaction of all oil-producing countries when the oil rent started flowing in. The belief is that direct delivery, keeping things under the direct control of the bureaucracy of the state, will allow reducing costs because going to look at every penny that is spent, and will enhance the control. There is a delusion whereby, if everything is done by the ministry or by the bureaucracy, the minister will be able to control everything, and he will be on top of everything. In fact, we know that this is not the case. Once the expansion of the bureaucracy is beyond a certain point, the minister may be nominally in control, but in fact he does not control anything, or almost, because the details are too much, and it ends up in a situation in which no one is responsible. So, shifting to indirect delivery, so instead of engaging in direct delivery, doing things indirectly, is the key to efficiency, in my opinion, and that is what I'm trying to describe. What does it mean to have indirect delivery? It means creating autonomous agencies, or if you have activities that can be carried out for profit, you will create corporations, like a power company, an airline company, and so on and so forth. We know that. But for other activities, you will create an autonomous agency, something that is not quite a corporation. What does autonomy mean? It means that the agency, or the corporation for that matter, has its own governance structure. In theory, corporations always have their own governance structure, but then sometimes, the board is filled with bureaucrats. The president, the chairman of the board is the minister, and then, this becomes purely a formal affair. It's not really autonomous. What I'm trying to describe is that we have a truly independent governance structure, which is fully empowered to decide for budgetary and management decisions, including hiring and firing personnel, and engaging in deciding on major investment projects. Frequently, even when we have corporations or national oil companies, their level of autonomy is far from complete, and there is some interference in the management, which has the consequence of de-responsabilizing the formal heads of or governance structure of the corporation state itself. In this framework, what the state does is to dictate the mission of the agency. It tells the agency what you are here for. It appoints the managers for fixed terms. Very importantly, it benchmarks performance. The mission should be formulated in such a way that there is a measure of whether you are fulfilling the mission or not. And this is the most difficult part of it, defining the right benchmarks that create the right incentives. It is very important that in any case the relationship should be at arm's length. In other words, there should be distance in between the two parties. Otherwise, there is no control. Agencies are different from corporations. The main difference is that agencies are not for profit, while corporations can be and should be in reality for profit. Not for profit, however, does not mean that the services are provided for free. I think in general it is preferable for agencies to have their own means, and that means having an endowment, having a capital that will allow them to set themselves up and compensate for the fact that when they provide services, even if they request a payment, and they should request a payment, the revenue may not match expenses. So you have an endowment that covers with its revenue part of your expenses. In general, I believe it is preferable, and I think the literature is rather unanimous on this, to make subsidies explicit. That is, instead of providing services for free, which ends up hiding the cost of those services, you should ask to the public, the user of those services, to pay. This is can be matched by then providing explicit payments to compensate for what is requested from the public if you don't want the public to pay in full or at least in part. So the corporations and the agencies should charge the full cost of their services, and so that it is known what the cost of their services is, that you have a visible indicator of their cost. An arm's length relationship between the state and the corporation is a prerequisite for this. If you don't have a relationship of distance between these two, it will not be possible to achieve this. The end purpose of all this is to create a kind of market. It's a market relationship between the supplier, which is of the service, which is the agency, and the customer. The customer is the public, the customer is the state that pays for the agency explicitly on the side in order to support the service. I think this will encourage autonomous agencies to become islands of excellence, as was mentioned, because they will be under scrutiny to lower costs and improve their services. If they are properly benchmarked, they will be pushed and called to be responsible for the quality of the services that they provide. In some cases, you will have several agencies offering the same service. A case in point is, for example, in the education field, several universities, several secondary schools. This can be offering all the same service, and this will allow some competition to exist, because you will be able to say, these are the results achieved by this university, and you are a peer, and why are you not achieving the same results? In other cases, you will have agencies that are monopolies, because they are the only ones tasked with a specific objective. So in other cases, it's important to have somebody who is a regulator, another entity, an independent entity that is a regulator, to oversee the functioning of this market and make sure that it works properly. As a way of example, let me briefly tell you how this might work in the field of higher education. I think this is an area in which this approach could relatively easily be implemented and highly beneficial, especially because education is an area in which the government spends a lot of money. Universities, but the same may be said for secondary schools, I personally believe, and even for primary schools, in my opinion, should be made autonomous and be given endowments. After all, the major universities in this world, the Harvards, the Yales, the Princetons of this world are exactly this. They are autonomous agencies. They are private, but in what sense are they private? They have no owner. They are even the graduate institute I work for is a foundation. It's a private law foundation, so it's not public, but it is not a private entity in the sense of being a corporation that has to generate a profit for someone. All of these have endowments, and these endowments should go preferably beyond just the buildings and the physical assets that they require. These universities should charge tuition to their students to cover their costs. At the same time, the students can receive scholarships from, again, one or more separate autonomous agencies. You may set up either one body that is in charge of giving scholarships to everybody or to certain categories of students, the needy students, the deserving students, the students that go into technical subjects, preferably relative to students that go into literary subjects and things like that. You can modulate incentives in such a way that you will get the desirable results. These scholarships are not necessarily equal to the level of tuition, so in some cases you may think that the university is charging too much, and so you would say, no, I'm not going to pay for the full tuition that you are charging. And if someone wants to pay the difference, fine, but otherwise I think this is excessive. And so this is a recipe to have some give and take, some control over what the autonomous agencies will do. And then you need systematic benchmarking, and that's the key really of the whole story. There has to be some specialized technical bureau, research office that engages in systematically measuring the performance of universities. And in my opinion, this, for example, could be based on whether the graduates find a job. If they find a job, that means that the education that they receive has been useful. If you produce lots of graduates and they don't find jobs, then there is a problem with what you are doing. Not necessarily the only measure, but one important measure. So, in this scenario, what is the state doing? The state should dictate broad higher education policies. It should decide whether to create universities. If it creates universities, establish new endowments or increase existing endowments, appoint the boards and directors, endow or financially support scholarship granting institutions, all of this, and ensure that benchmarking studies are carried out. All of this creates a structure which is market-like structure, and the state, the ministry has to oversee the functioning of this whole structure, but not engage in direct delivery of the service. Now, this would be useful for downsizing government expenditure, I submit to you, because the cost of running the government in its strict definition in this approach would be reduced. Universities, in this case, would not be viewed as part of the government. They are autonomous bodies, they are foundations. They are not part of the bureaucracy, so to speak, not part of the civil service. And so they are not part of the current expenditure of the government. Of course, if you entirely rely on year-to-year transfers, and you tell the universities, give me your cost and I will pay the cost, even if the university is formally set up as an autonomous agency, it is not an autonomous agency. It will still be a part of current expenditure. However, if you give the university an endowment and tell them, okay, this is your money, and you have to live off this money, you have to pay your costs out of tuition and the income of the endowment, and you will receive no current subsidies from government expenditure. Then current expenditure is reduced, and what you do, you change the composition of government expenditure from paying current salaries and current costs to creating endowments, and so something that is more in the nature of capital expenditure. In this sense, I think oil-producing countries, tier states, have an advantage in the sense that most other governments simply do not have the means to consider establishing endowments for independent agencies. You know, they are indebted up to on top of their head, and they struggle simply to pay their current functioning budget, and they can have only very limited capabilities to invest. In contrast, rentier states or oil-producing countries can set aside a portion of the rent to create these endowments. They can decide that some of the oil income will be devoted to the endowments. In fact, relatively speaking, a growing share of the oil income, because progressively by taking out certain functions and the respective bureaucracy out of the government defined in narrow sense, you will be reducing current expenditure, and so you will have, all other things being equal, more money to devote to capital expenditure and to investment. So this is an appropriate way of looking at it, because we know that natural resources should be viewed as assets that are liquidated and monetized rather than value added. They are not properly value added. They are just a form of divestment of capital that is inherited by the nation. So oil production is capital divestment, and the proceeds of this divestment should be reinvested in other forms in order to maintain the wealth of the nation. So allocating oil revenue to the creation of endowments is a way of underlining the nature of capital transaction that selling oil has. It also increases the flexibility of the government budget, which is very important. We all are accustomed to read that the GCC countries from one year to the next, they used to require oil at $80. Now they need oil at $90 to balance the budget, and so on and so forth. That's an indication of rigidity in the budget. You need to resist the rigidity. And if you shift from current to capital expenditure, then the budget becomes much less rigid, because capital expenditure can be modulated. You don't need to create endowments every year. Some years you can create more, other years you can create less, but you keep current expenditure under control. People, when I tell this story, people ask me, what happens if I create an autonomous agency and they do a poor job? Well, I think it is to be recognized that some of the agencies that you create will not do well. They will fail. And this is normal in a market setting where you always have some competitors that are not doing well. They either get new management or are taken over by other competitors, or simply go bankrupt and disappear. So this is something that we should envisage also for the autonomous agencies. The fact that you privatize, or that something is a private enterprise, is not a guarantee for success. We normally only see the successful ones because the unsuccessful ones have disappeared and they are no longer there. And it is through this process of allowing unsuccessful enterprises to disappear that the market system works and guarantees some overall efficiency. So there is no guarantee of success for the autonomous agencies, and the only guarantee is imposing market discipline, and you should allow the agencies to fail if they are not successful and fold them down. We have some examples of that in the region. So what I propose is a systematic strategy for slimming down. This government has a tendency, a national tendency to become heavier and heavier. Needs a strategy to systematically slim down. This means having a systematic effort to identify tasks that may be entrusted to autonomous agencies. You should look at what each ministry does and ask yourself, is there something that I can take away from this ministry and set up as an autonomous agency? And you will discover that there are many things that can be done in this way if you do it systematically. In some cases the transformation is easy, in other cases the transformation requires a bit more inventiveness, but there are many things that you can do in this way. So progressively sections of the bureaucracy should be transformed into autonomous agencies, and you should give them sufficient endowment to make them independent or marginally depend on current transfer from the budget. You can have private-public partnerships, of course. In some cases, if private funds are available, either benevolent donations to establish non-profit institutions, we have this. Or in some cases, you can have a combination of for-profit and not-for-profit institutions side by side. For example, hospitals, you can have hospitals that are created as foundations from the state and given an endowment, and then private hospitals that will be for-profit, and the two can compete on the same market and provide the same services at different prices, of course. I'm interested in the process of creating endowments and agencies that have endowments, because they would turn into institutional investors, and I think this is very important for the development process of the GCC countries. By creating these endowment agencies, you add a layer of institutional investors that traditionally has not been available in the financial markets. In the experience of all mature financial markets, we know that institutional investors play a very important role for the stability and liquidity of capital markets. And so the proposed strategy would not only serve the purpose of promoting efficiency in the public administration, but also has the potential of strengthening private enterprises and facilitating economic diversification. So it's a way of changing the balance between public, government, and private sector by strengthening the private sector through the provision of a group of institutional investors. If you support the agencies through current expenditure, this positive phenomenon does not take place. So the original part of my story, if you wish, is the creation of endowments. The fact that by creating endowments, you also influence the functioning of financial markets. If the alternative that you could think of is okay, let's put all the oil money into a single fund, and then pay. But if you do that, you create something that either can only invest internationally, or if it invests domestically, it will end up nationalizing all private sector. So the private sector, private corporations do not want to have a provider of equity, for example, that will eventually acquire control. So that is the problem. All of this requires human capital. In the end, this is always true. The success of any structure that you can think of depends on the quality of people that inhabit this structure. And the decentralization strategy certainly requires many more mature, responsible, and entrepreneurial people than a ministerial hierarchy. A ministerial hierarchy is simple. If you are passive, you wait for your orders, and everything goes not well, but normally. Here you need people that take responsibility, that take risks, that are entrepreneurial. I think that there has been so much progress in education that this is now possible. Maybe it was not possible 40 years ago or 30 years ago, but it is now possible. I very much believe that there is more talent in search of responsibilities than the opposite. There are many young people who are keen to prove themselves and have the educational background which is needed to prove themselves, and they need to be given a chance to prove that they are capable of delivering excellence in their job. If as long as they are offered jobs in the bureaucracy, they will not be given a chance to prove themselves. So market discipline remains crucial to success, and benchmarking, I insist on this, it's probably, proper benchmarking is probably the most difficult part of the whole story, but we are going in that direction. There is a lot of experience already. And you need to properly benchmark and be ready to act promptly to redress failure. The whole system must be meritocratic in the sense that if somebody is not doing well, he should be kindly and graciously relieved, because otherwise it doesn't work. This is my way of, my last slide, and my way of representing synthetically the whole story. The state receives the oil revenue, and it can decide to put some of this in a sovereign wealth fund. I'm not contesting this, but I think it is more productive to use this oil revenue to establish endowed agencies, and perhaps to put it into what I call a development bank, which is an institution that offers not only credit, not only loans, but also participation in the equity. I understand that the new fund for small and medium business, for example, is exactly the kind of institution here in Kuwait. And then, both the endowed agencies and the development banks will contribute to allowing national corporations to increase their equity, to increase their capital, and in this way move beyond their borders. That's something that very few have achieved so far in the private sector, and engage in international acquisitions. As we were discussing yesterday, you were telling me there is a glass ceiling, that prevents local business enterprises from really becoming international actors. And this glass ceiling must be removed. There must be ways in which local companies can acquire additional equity capital while at the same time maintaining, the initiators, the main entrepreneurs should be able to maintain control. And through the establishment of endowments, this is what allows you to do it. Right? And that's how it is done in more mature financial markets. End of my story. Thank you.
Thank you very much.